In 2010, 3 new teams joined the Formula 1 grid. The more the merrier, a lot of people were saying, but the problem was, these 3 new teams, well, nobody really gave them much time. And any chances of Formula 1 going back to the glory days of the mid-1990s with 26 cars on the grid were nil, because at the end of 2009, BMW sold the team back to Peter Sauber, while Toyota left completely. As a result, the 3 new teams coming in got the grid up to 24. If Toyota had stayed, and maybe Super Aguri had somehow stayed alive through this period, we'd have had the same situation we had in 1994, which was 28 cars going for 26 slots. Now that might get some of you excited, but come on, let's be real. It would just be the same 2 cars not qualifying. HRT usually. And those 3 new teams were HRT, as just briefly alluded to, Lotus and Virgin, each of them being lured onto the grid with promises of stuff that never came. Promises of cost caps was one, which wouldn't be seen until they were introduced over a decade later. They were promised a cheaper, more sustainable Formula 1 that might have helped them compete. They were also supposedly promised $10 million upfront from Bernie to help them get started as the economy was in the toilet. But that never happened either. And while I've covered all 3 of their brief exploits in Formula 1 in a giant video, I've gone into each of their downfalls individually. Caterham got their own one, HRT got their own one, and that leaves just 1 team left. That 3rd team, through process of elimination, was Virgin, which later became Marussia, then Manor Marussia, and then finally, just Manor. But the thing is, the team was always Manor. It went through the different name changes because of who was invested at which particular time. The team initially entered as Manor, but when Richard Branson brought over his airline money from Braun at the end of 2009, the team was named Virgin for sponsorship reasons. And if you remember back to one specific episode of Top Gear, Manor Motorsport was the team they were all making those Yorkshire jokes about how they were teaching Timo Glock to punch anybody who looked at him funny, and how they would be the team that was the Formula 1 equivalent of the bloke in a Sheffield nightclub who eggs his mates on to have a fight. Hey, you see that Alonso? He were looking at your pit board. Cove a line and spilt your practice lap, you can't have none of that, can you? And so on and so on. This is because Manor's logo was the White Rose of Yorkshire. Anybody who studied history at school might be familiar with the Wars of the Roses, the fights between the House of York and the House of Lancaster. York in white, Lancaster in red. All rooted in the 100 Years' War, as well as the quasi-military bastard feudalism resulting from the powerful duchies created by King Edward III. Either way, this resulted in the Lancastrian male lineage being totally wiped out, and the Tudor family laying claim to the throne, which gave us Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, and so on. But back to the racing. Manor was relatively successful in the juniors, and it's not like they had a bunch of drivers you've never heard of either. They were in the Formula 3 Euro Series and ran drivers such as Lucas Di Grassi, Kazuki Nakajima, Roberto Meri, Paul di Resta, and some kid called Hamilton, whoever he is. They also ran in GP3, Formula Renault, and a couple of other junior series. So it seemed that getting to Formula 1 at some point was a logical step, and this is something that was done by the likes of Forte, Pacific, and Jordan. So to avoid going back over how they got into Formula 1 in the first place, because there's already been a video on that, we'll just focus on how they got to where they were towards the end, which I did go over in the 2010 teams video, but only really brushed upon it towards the end. Virgin was usually the team at the bottom of the tables, being beaten by Lotus and HRT in 2010 and 2011, which seems mental considering they had some more prominent backers. In fact, Bernie could see this as well, and he thought that Virgin's performance through 2010 was actually embarrassing. At the end of 2010, Bernie did call Virgin's initial performance embarrassing, saying that the 3 teams as a whole were doing nothing for Formula 1 and they needed to get rid of a couple of them, while also saying that Richard Branson should do what Dietrich Mateschitz had done with the Jaguar team and put a lot more money in to get them forward. But John Booth, the team boss, said that Branson was brave in joining a startup that might not see it through, and had actually been very supportive of the team. But having seen some of the claims that were made when Branson was supporting Braun, it did seem like he wanted as much advertising as possible for the littlest possible investment. But that's to be confirmed. Virgin also had Nick Worth, formerly of Simtech, on board, and they were trying to use computational fluid dynamics, and only computational fluid dynamics, to design the car. Something that had never really been done before, as teams were still using wind tunnels. Since Virgin didn't really have the money to pull it off, it all went tilt, so Worth left. And so did Branson. Thankfully though, backing came from the Russian carmaker Marussia, who had been involved with the team since they entered, and the team name was changed in time for the 2012 season. The team's future was basically guaranteed until the end of 2014 by doing so. But it didn't seem to get any better for them. They did manage to finish above HRT in 2012, but that was only because HRT was effectively done by this point. So now it was between the new look Marussia team and Lotus/Caterham for the best of the minnows, and Lotus continued to beat them, despite scoring no points themselves. HRT meanwhile barely made it to the end of 2012. But Marussia were in trouble before the 2012 season even began, because they missed pre-season testing due to the 2012 car failing the FIA crash tests 18 times. When HRT folded, it was now between Caterham and Marussia for the bottom of the pile. And Marussia would now start to find something. With Ferrari Academy product Jules Bianchi in the car, the Marussia team had some driver talent levels a bit higher than they usually would have had. Max Chilton was in the other car, and Max would finish every race in the 2013 season, and it meant that consistency could provide the result needed to get Marussia above Caterham in the Constructors. And Marussia did get the 10th place they were searching for, with Bianchi scoring a 13th place that was good enough to place Marussia above Caterham and get them some much needed prize money. But as Formula 1 entered the hybrid era, both teams were struggling and both of them were hemorrhaging cash. Tony Fernandez at Caterham was looking to sell, while Marussia was struggling with the increased costs of Formula 1 with these new hybrid engines. But, remarkably, Bianchi managed to score some points at Monaco, which left Caterham in the unenviable position of being the team that had entered the most races without scoring any points. But the celebrations were short-lived. Bianchi had his fatal accident at Suzuka towards the end of 2014, and the Marussia team entered freefall. Just after the team's home race in Sochi, the administrators were called in. There was a shortfall in funding, so the administrators were called in to make sense of the situation and try to figure out if there could be a long-term solution for the team in a very short turnaround time. If the team could somehow be rescued, they could carry on into 2015. But at the end of the season, after the team no-showed in Austin, Brazil and Abu Dhabi, the team closed its doors, and 200 people lost their jobs. But just before the 2015 season started, there was a lifeline. The team was bought from Marussia, with Manor running the team independently. In doing so, the team could continue to operate. The reason for the shortfall in cash late into the 2014 season was because the team's backer, Andrei Cheglikov, had been affected by Bianchi's crash and saw no reason to continue investing. But the team had now been bought, so they were out of administration, and they could, continue into 2015. Although, they were down as Manor Marussia, so they could claim the 2014 prize money. Apparently, Force India was the only team that tried to vote against Manor coming back onto the grid, but ultimately, they were allowed back on the grid. And they did so using the previous year's car. The FIA gave the team special dispensation to do so, provided that the car passed the crash tests, and they pinky promised the FIA they'd update it to 2015 standards at some point. The car now had to weigh more, and they changed the nose cone assembly a bit. But other than that, it was the same car. But while they would have been allowed onto the grid for the first round of the season, they never made it, because of what had happened in the wake of their administration. The computers the team owned had been wiped in preparation for auction when the team folded at the end of 2014. Something that they'd forgotten about until they built the cars in Australia and found that all their files were missing. The FIA scolded them officially for turning up without being prepared to race, but they escaped any punishment, with their software issues resolved for the next round in Malaysia, where the field was back up to 20 cars. I say 20, it was 19. Will Stevens didn't start the race. Roberto Meri in the other car meanwhile finished 15th. Although he was 3 laps down and had to be given permission to start the race in the first place because he was outside of 107%. Sponsorship was then found over the course of the season, with the team having a new look at the Canadian and British Grand Prix. Sponsorships from Airbnb and a company called Flexbox helped the team out. It wasn't the same massive money deals that Mercedes had with Petronas or Ferrari with UPS, but it was money, and that's what matters. At the British Grand Prix, the car looked slightly different again as it received some technical updates. Some of the only technical updates that car ever received, and it allowed the car to get a little bit further up the grid. At the British Grand Prix those updates debuted at, Meri finished 12th and Stevens was 13th. Which sounds great until you realise that 7 cars didn't finish, and the 2 cars were 3 laps down yet again. That was actually the team's best result of the season. Alexander Rossi was later drafted in for a few rounds, including the US Grand Prix, where the team painted a big American flag on the rear wing end plates. The next best result for the team was Meri's 13th place in Russia, with Stevens in 14th, where, once again, the Manors were dead last, but Meri was now only 1 lap off the pace, with Stevens 2. So that was some improvement at least. So as it was, the team finished plumb last in the standings once again on 0 points, although they did score 2 points prior to that, but it was another 0-point finish like it had been in 2010, 11, 12 and 13. But while they managed to save themselves for 2015, the problems are mounting up yet again. Just before the Mexican Grand Prix of 2015, team bosses John Booth and Graham Loudon announced that they'd be leaving the team at the end of the season, citing differences with team owner Stephen Fitzpatrick, the man who bought the team just before the 2015 season started. Fitzpatrick, in addition to being the man who bought Marussia, is also the founder of the energy company OVO, which is one of the biggest independent energy companies in the UK. So the team got rebranded again ahead of the 2016 season. Manor Grand Prix Racing Limited, although they were down as Manor Racing MRT officially, with MRT being the name of the constructor. The Ferrari engines that had been in use in 2014 and 15 were gone and been replaced with Mercedes units, which was seen as a bit of a boost because of how good the Mercedes units had been in the last 2 years. But it does have to be said that in the previous 2 years with Ferrari hybrids, the cars had only failed to finish 5 times, which was incredible reliability for such an underfunded team. And in those 5 retirements, 6 if you count Bianchi's Suzuka crash, only 3 of those were down to the car breaking down. Bianchi lost his brakes at Malaysia in 2014, Mary lost his drive shaft at Montreal in 2015, and Stevens had an oil leak at Austria, also in 2015. That's it. Considering how often those McLarens were found at the side of the track in this time period, that's fantastic going. So for 2016, Manor had an all-new car. The MRT-05 was launched in time for pre-season testing and had been developed by Pat Fry, Dave Ryan and Nicholas Tombazis, all coming in from Ferrari, McLaren and Ferrari respectively. And in testing, the car managed to log 484 total laps, with the 2 new drivers right down at the bottom. Those 2 new drivers were Mercedes Junior Pascal Wehrlein, which made sense given that the car had Mercedes engines in the back, and the other driver was the Indonesian unknown Rio Haryanto, who brought some significant sponsorship money from the oil company Pertamina, which also became the title sponsor of the team. While Haryanto was off the pace and usually routed to the back of the grid, barring any engine penalties and that sort of thing, Wehrlein seemed to have a little something that was dragging the car a bit further forward. At the Bahrain Grand Prix of 2016, Wehrlein was only 1 place away from making it into the second qualifying session, qualifying ahead of the likes of Perez, Palmer and Felipe Nasr, with Haryanto starting ahead of the Sauber as well. But it was at the Austrian Grand Prix of 2016 where the team would have its day of days, and it almost brought them some massive returns. Wehrlein got his Manor into 12th on the grid, beating Grosjean, Alonso, Sainz, Perez, Magnussen, Palmer, Kvyat and the 2 Saubers. Although Sainz and Perez didn't set times, so there is that. But if you're in a team like Manor, you'd take it all day long. Haryanto meanwhile would have been 17th, but he got a penalty for failing to observe yellow flags in the first session. But it seemed that the car was quite well suited to this particular track. Although that said, the Austrian Grand Prix is at high altitude, and the Mercedes engine had a bit of extra grunt. But again, if you're in a team like Manor, you don't tend to dwell on circumstance. But it got even better for the team in the race. While the rest of the F1 world was looking at what happened between Hamilton and Rosberg up at the front, as Rosberg caused a collision between the 2 cars on the final lap, Wehrlein's car crossed the line in 10th, behind the Williams of Valtteri Bottas. In doing so, Pascal picked up a single point for the team, and with Sauber having an utterly atrocious season, it could have made all the difference at the end of the year. Although if you're Manor, you'd be wanting to do this sort of thing at the end of the season where there's not so many races left to run, because in Formula 1, anything can happen. And it usually does. But after the German Grand Prix at Hockenheim, Haryanto was demoted down to a test driver role and Pertamina pulled its sponsorship. In his place came another driver who was seen as having a bit of talent and would end up being a future race winner, that being Esteban Ocon. Haryanto was dropped for failure to meet contractual obligations, which could mean anything really. Ocon had been Renault's reserve driver that year and was also a Mercedes product, so Manor, by this point, had effectively become the Mercedes junior team. Manor also thought they got something good cooking, calling the lineup potent, and hoped that the combined talents of Ocon and Wehrlein would keep them ahead of Sauber, which I think is why they did it, just to make sure that their best results were better than Sauber's could be for the remainder of the season. And looking further into things, it looks like Haryanto's sponsors weren't paying up, as the official F1 website press release makes mention of a situation with the backers, and that Haryanto's management was worried that the deal couldn't be honoured. Meanwhile, Cyril Irritable at Renault was happy that Ocon was now going to be racing full time, as a test in a Mercedes at Silverstone earlier in the year showed that he got a certain something. Hashtag it's the car. While it seemed the Manor could be good in certain conditions, the rest of the season didn't work out too well for the team. They were struggling to make the top 15, let alone the top 10, with a 15th place coming at Malaysia for Wehrlein, a 12th for Ocon in Brazil, and a double top 15 at Abu Dhabi. But it's the race in Brazil that effectively sunk the team. This was the race that Max Verstappen lost the rear in the wet and only just kept it out of the wall. People get so hooked on that moment they forgot that Hamilton won that race from Rosberg, while further down the order, the fate of a team was being sealed in the most harem-scarum way possible. With just one race left to run in the season, Manor had 1 point. Sauber had 0. The prize money would have been invaluable to Manor and would have kept them alive long enough into 2017 to maybe secure some major sponsorship or investment. There were 2 races to go, they just had to hold on. And it's not like one team or the other would have gone under at the end of the season. Lombo Finance had bought into Sauber in the summer, so most of the financial issues that Sauber had from finishing low down in 2014 and 16 would have largely been cancelled out. The ball was really in Manor's court, so they had to pull off something to get the prize money, much like they'd done in 2014. And with the new investment, Sauber was now able to actually build the parts that they were designing. They were able to design the parts, but they couldn't afford to build them, so with this new funding they could now get the parts built and put onto the car, and it slowly got them further and further forward. As it was at the 2016 Brazilian Grand Prix, Felipe Nasr in a Sauber scored 2 points for finishing 9th. Sauber 2, Manor 1. Sauber were up to the tune of about £30 million, and Manor were down £30 million. £30 million evaporated. Just like that. Sauber got the money instead, but in a case of turbo irony, Nasr managed to kill his own F1 career in the process, because he was supposed to go to Manor in 2017 and take his Banco do Brasil money with him. That, plus the $30 million to Manor, would have kept them somewhat solvent through the 2017 season. But David Ryan remained upbeat for the final part of that year, saying that Manor wasn't going to give up on getting that 10th place back. They didn't give up, and they were able to dominate the Saubers all weekend. It's just that neither of the Manor cars ended up in the top 10. In the weeks following the 2016 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, Stephen Fitzpatrick revealed that over the course of the previous 6 months, he'd been talking to potential investors to help the team secure the funding needed for 2017 and beyond. Claims were an investor had been found, a gentleman called Tavo Helmond, the man who brought the US and Mexican Grand Prix back to Formula 1 in 2012 and 2015. With Helmond's investment, there would have been doors open to investment from sponsors from Texas, which may or may not include oil companies. Bernie, meanwhile, he didn't think this was going to go through. He actually said out loud that he didn't think that Manor was going to make the grid for 2017. And they didn't. They had a car designed, but that's about it. In the January of 2017, Fitzpatrick had to give up on the continuation of the Manor team. He didn't want to start a season he wasn't going to finish, and the team went into compulsory administration. With the team under administration, Helmond made 2 offers, but both of them were turned down. The first offer was a consortium of business people, including Helmond, some American and Canadian businessmen, and apparently Lewis Hamilton's dad. The second offer came with potential investment from Mercedes, but this was also turned down. Without a buyer, 150 of the 212 employees were laid off, and the ones who were kept on were only there just in case there was a last-minute buyer. As it was, there wasn't. So Manor became the last of the 2010 trio to meet its end, and it managed to do okay, all things considered. It was the only one of the 3 teams to score points, and it was the only one to survive beyond the first year of the hybrid era, albeit barely. And it managed to soldier on without reports of suppliers failing to be paid, without reports of lawsuits or litigation because the owners had been up to something a bit iffy. Now admittedly, there were the 2 accidents involving Maria Di Vallota and Jules Bianchi, but when it comes to scandals or controversy, I'm talking more of the stuff that Vijay Mallya and Andrea Sassetti may or may not have been involved in. Underfunded and slow is the general takeaway here, but they still managed to soldier on even if they lost their existence in the most heartbreaking way possible. Sauber outscoring them with only 1 race left of the season after that Brazilian Grand Prix. But it is what it is. And I worked out that if Sauber had scored 1 point along with Manor, Sauber would have still finished above them because of their highest result being, higher than Manor's was, if you follow me with all this. But that's the thing with Formula 1. There's a lot of highs and even more lows. So then a look at the Marussia F1 team as it became Manor in 2015 and 2016. If this has been an interesting look through the motorsport history books, then do give the video a like so I know a good job was done. And for more stuff from the channel, get subscribed and also get that bell on so you never miss out on anything else that I do around here. Massive thanks as ever go out to the mad lads over at Patreon for the continued support, and if you want to help keep things running around here, there'll be a link to Patreon down in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, affiliates and any other bits and pieces you might want or need to know. Or there's super thanks for any one and done donations, and memberships if you just want to do Patreon style support, but without going to Patreon. So until next time, I've been Aidan Millward, have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.